The scent of ripe mangoes. The sound of Phnom Penh is a constant, grinding symphony. The roar of 1,000 motos, the chatter of vendors, the distant thrum of construction, it's a noise that gets into your bones. For 20 years, it was the only music I knew. I used to think the silence of the countryside would be a relief. I was wrong. There is no such thing as silence in the deep jungle. There is only a different kind of noise, an older, more watchful kind. And once you have truly heard it, the noise of the city becomes a comfort, a shield I no longer have. My story begins with the smell of my mother's favorite soup, heavy with lemongrass and prahak, and the sight of her frail hands, looking like bundles of dried twigs against the worn cotton sheets. The doctors used long, complicated words, but they all translated to the same simple, brutal fact: money. Money we did not have. My job as a moto taxi driver was barely enough to keep rice in our bowls, let alone pay for the kind of medicine that could turn back the tide of sickness. That's when I heard about the work. A cousin of a cousin knew a man, a foreman, who was hearing for a logging crew up north, deep in Mondulkiri province. The pay was substantial, more than I could make in a year of dodging traffic in the city. The work was hard, they said, dangerous. 6 weeks in a remote camp, no contact with the outside world. To me, it didn't sound dangerous. It sounded like hope. It sounded like the medicine my mother needed. So I packed a small bag, kissed my sleeping mother on her feverish forehead, and promised her I would be back before the mango season was over. It is a promise that now tastes like poison in my mouth. The journey itself was a descent. First, the crowded bus, its sides painted with leaping gods and goddesses lumbering out of the city's sprawl. Then hours of watching the concrete and dust give way to endless shimmering green rice paddies. The air grew thick and heavy. In a small provincial town, I was herded onto the back of a huge, rusted truck with 3 other men. There was Bong Kem, the foreman, a man whose face was a roadmap of hard sun and harder years. His eyes were small and sharp, missing nothing. He moved with a slow, deliberate economy, as if saving his energy for something important. Then there was Rith, maybe a few years older than me, with a cocky smile and muscles earned from a life of hard labor. He bragged about previous jobs, about the size of the trees he had felled. And finally, there was Visna, a quiet, skinny boy from a village near the border who clutched a string of wooden prayer beads in his hand, his lips moving silently. The truck left the paved road behind, and for the last 4 hours we clawed our way along a muddy track that was more of a suggestion than a road. The jungle rose up on either side of us like a solid green wall. The air became so humid it was like breathing water. The noise of the engine was the only thing keeping the immense, watchful silence of the forest at bay. When we finally arrived, the camp was nothing more than a ragged clearing hacked out of the wilderness. A few tarpaulin shelters, a makeshift kitchen area, and a fire pit surrounded by half-sawn logs. And everywhere the stumps, an ugly, weeping graveyard of trees. A single, noisy generator provided the only light, a sickly yellow bubble against a darkness so complete it felt like a physical presence. That first night, Bong Kem gathered us by the fire. The generator coughed and sputtered, making the shadows leap and writhe. "Listen to me, all of you," he said, his voice low and serious. His gaze lingered on me, the city boy, and then on Rith, the boaster. "This is not your home, you are a guest here. The forest has its owners. The Nikta, the Arak, the spirits of this place are old and powerful." He gestured to a small, crude platform he'd built near the edge of the camp, on which sat a bowl of rice, some incense sticks, and a bottle of rice wine. "Before you cut, you ask for permission, you give thanks. You do not take more than you need. You do not make loud, foolish noises at night. You do not relieve yourself against a tree without asking its forgiveness first. This forest provides, but it also watches, and it does not forgive disrespect." Rith let out a short, sharp laugh. "Come on, Bong Kem, they're just trees. We're here to cut them down, not pray to them. The only spirits I worry about are the ones in that bottle you offered." Bong Kem's eyes narrowed. "A tree is not just wood, boy. A very old tree, it has a long memory. You be careful your foolishness doesn't get written into it." He turned and walked away, leaving a tense silence broken only by the chirping of a million cicadas. That night I lay on my thin mat under the tarpaulin, listening to the symphony of the jungle. It wasn't the peaceful sound I had imagined. It was a dense tapestry of clicks, hisses, and calls, a constant, vibrant life that felt utterly alien. I thought of my mother, of the city's familiar chaos, and a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I was a stranger here, and for the first time I felt the truth of Bong Kem's words. I was a guest, and I was not welcome. The first week was brutal. The heat, the mosquitoes, the sheer physical exhaustion of it. From sunrise to sunset, the air was filled with the screaming roar of chainsaws and the percussive crash of falling timber. We worked in a thick haze of sweat and sawdust. My city-soft hands were soon blistered and bleeding. Bong Kem was a strict but fair boss. He showed me how to handle the saw, how to read the lean of a tree, how to not get myself killed. Every morning, without fail, he would go to his little shrine and light fresh incense, murmuring prayers under his breath. Visna would often join him, his face a mask of solemn devotion. Rith, however, scoffed at them. He was the fastest worker, felling more trees than anyone else. He would shout and whoop with each crash, treating it like a game. "Making way for progress, old man," he'd yell over the din to Bong Kem, who would just shake his head and continue his work in stony silence. I fell somewhere in the middle. My mind was on the money, on my mother, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling of violation. Each time a century-old giant shuddered and fell, the ground shaking beneath my feet, I felt a pang of something like guilt. The silence that followed each crash was profound, as if the entire jungle was holding its breath in shock. It was in the second week that things began to change. We were pushing deeper into the forest, to a section of older, larger trees. The company in Phnom Penh was pushing Bong Kem for a specific type of luxury wood, koki tom, and they were getting impatient. One afternoon, we came across it, a tree unlike any other we had seen. It was colossal, its trunk so wide it would take all four of us to link hands around it. Its canopy was a world unto itself, blocking out the sun and casting the forest floor in a permanent green twilight. Gnarled roots, thick as a man's waist, snaked across the ground. It felt ancient, like it had been standing there since the beginning of time. "No," Bong Kem said immediately, his voice flat. He had stopped a good 20 paces from it and he wouldn't go any closer. "We do not touch this one. This is a mother tree and Arak lives here." Rith spat a wad of tobacco juice onto the ground. "It's also the biggest koki tree I've ever seen. The boss would pay a massive bonus for this one, Bong, enough to finish our contract a week early." "The price is too high," Bong Kem replied, his eyes fixed on the tree's immense trunk. "Some trees are not for us, we go around." But the seed was planted. For the next 2 days, Rith wouldn't shut up about the bonus, about getting back to the city, about the money. The pressure from the company was mounting, relayed through crackly messages on the satellite phone. I could see the conflict in Bong Kem's face. He was caught between the demands of his employer and the deep-seated respect or fear of his ancestors. I tried to stay out of it. The tree made my skin crawl. There was a feeling around it, a strange stillness. The air was cooler, the usual jungle noises more subdued. It felt like a temple, a place you should enter with your head bowed. On the third day, the decision was taken out of Bong Kem's hands. A message came through: get the big tree or the whole contract was cancelled. No pay, nothing. For me, that meant no medicine. The image of my mother's face, pale and weak, flashed in my mind. My own fear was a luxury I couldn't afford. Bong Kem's face was ashen. That evening, he spent hours at his shrine, lighting a whole bundle of incense and leaving a larger offering of food and wine. He chanted for a long time, his voice a low, pleading drone. It did not feel like a prayer of thanks. It felt like an apology. The next morning, the air was thick with a tension you could taste. We stood before the great tree, our chainsaws glinting in the dappled light. "Let me do it," Rith said, grinning, eager to be the one to conquer the beast. Bong Kem held up a hand. He approached the tree, his head bowed. He placed his palms flat against the rough bark. We couldn't hear what he said, but his lips moved for a full minute, a final, desperate plea for permission. When he stepped back, his face was grim. He looked at us, his eyes filled with a fatalistic sorrow. "May the spirits forgive us," he whispered. "We are just poor men trying to feed our families." Rith just laughed, pulled the cord on his saw, and the silence was shattered by an angry roar. He made the first cut. The blade bit into the ancient wood, and a fine, dark red sawdust, almost the color of blood, sprayed into the air. That's when the smell began. It wasn't the clean, sharp scent of freshly cut wood. It was thick, cloying, and sweet. The smell of overripe mangoes, so sweet it was almost sickening, but underneath it there was another scent, a coppery, metallic tang like fresh sap or something else, something vital. We worked all day, the four of us taking turns. The tree was impossibly dense. It seemed to fight back, dulling our blades, its wood seeming to groan with each cut. The strange, sweet coppery smell grew stronger, hanging in the humid air, clinging to our clothes and skin. By late afternoon we were exhausted, and the tree was still standing, though a massive wedge had been cut from its base. It leaned, creaking, but refused to fall. "It will go in the night," Bong Kem said, his voice heavy. "We have done enough, let it fall on its own." None of us argued. We were all unsettled. The jungle around us had gone unnervingly quiet. The cicadas were silent. The birds were gone. It was as if every living creature was waiting. Back at the camp, no one spoke much. We ate our rice in a grim silence, the roar of our own chainsaws still echoing in our ears. The generator sputtered, casting long, dancing shadows across the muddy clearing as the jungle's humidity pressed down like a physical weight. The smell was still with us, a ghostly presence that had followed us from the wounded tree. I was trying to force down another mouthful of rice when it happened. From the impenetrable blackness in the direction of the mother tree came the groaning crack of a massive tree splintering. It was not the sound of a clean cut. It was the sound of a colossal bone snapping. It was a sound of agony. It was followed by a ground-shaking thud that vibrated up through the soles of our feet and into our chests. The great tree had fallen. No one moved. Our own chainsaws lay silent and cold beside half-eaten bowls of rice. The generator chose that moment to cough and die, plunging us into absolute darkness save for the flickering embers of our fire. The sudden silence was deafening. Then the smell, which had been a background note, washed over the camp in a suffocating wave. Thick, cloying, the scent of overripe mangoes mixed with coppery sap. It was so strong I gagged, my stomach turning. It felt like we were breathing it in, like it was coating our lungs. And then another sound began. It was faint at first, hard to distinguish from the newly returned chirping of the cicadas. A soft, whispering sound. I looked around, thinking it was Visna praying, but he was frozen, his eyes wide with terror. Rith was staring into the darkness, his usual smirk gone, replaced by a slack-jawed disbelief. The whispering grew louder, and I realized with a jolt of pure ice in my veins where it was coming from. It wasn't coming from the jungle. It was coming from inside the camp. From the fresh, weeping stumps that ringed our fire. A chorus of faint, sorrowful whispers began to rise from the cut wood. Dozens of them, hundreds, each stump, each severed link to the earth was murmuring. They weren't words I could understand, not in any language I knew, but the emotion was perfectly, horrifyingly clear. It was a sound of immense grief, a sound of pain, a harmony of loss that blended with the insects and the oppressive darkness. The jungle was weeping, and we were the reason for its tears. We sat there, paralyzed by fear so primal it bypassed thought. The fire shrank, its light seeming to cower from the encroaching dark. The whispering from the stumps continued, a sound that would be forever burned into my memory. Bong Kem was the first to move. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing the half-empty bottle of rice wine from the shrine. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely pour it. He began splashing it on each of the stumps around the fire, muttering frantically under his breath. Forgive us, we are ignorant, forgive us." Rith finally snapped out of his stupor. "What are you doing, you old fool? It's just the wind," the wood settling. But his voice trembled, betraying his words. He couldn't meet anyone's eyes. The whispering didn't stop. If anything, the sorrowful tone began to shift. An undercurrent of something else was creeping in, a cold, sharp edge of anger. The sweet, cloying smell of mangoes and sap seemed to thicken, pressing in on us. It felt like it had a weight, a presence. That night, no one slept. We huddled together by the fire, feeding it stick by stick, as if its fragile light was the only thing keeping the immense, grieving darkness at bay. The whispers from the stumps eventually faded with the first hint of dawn, but the silence that replaced them was even more terrifying. The next day, a deep gloom hung over the camp. Bong Kem insisted we perform a proper ceremony of apology at the stump of the great tree. Rith refused. "I'm not praying to a log," he sneered, though the bravado in his voice was thin and brittle. "I'm going to mark our claim. We did the work, we get the money." He grabbed a can of red paint and an axe and stalked off into the jungle alone. Bong Kem pleaded with him to wait, to come with us, but Rith just waved him off. The three of us, me, Bong Kem, and a visibly terrified Visna, made our way to the fallen giant. The sight was devastating. It had carved a massive scar through the forest, crushing smaller trees in its fall. The stump was a raw, red wound in the earth, easily as wide as our truck. The coppery, sweet smell was overwhelming here, emanating in waves from the weeping wood. We lit incense, made offerings of rice and water, and Bong Kem prayed for a long time, his forehead pressed to the ground. I bowed my head, my heart a cold lump of dread. I prayed to any god that would listen, not for forgiveness, but for survival. I just wanted to go home. We returned to the camp as the sun began to set. Rith was already there, sitting by the unlit fire, sharpening his axe. He seemed strangely agitated. "Took you long enough," he grumbled, "wasting time with your ghosts." "Did you finish your work?" Bong Kem asked, his voice strained. "Of course," Rith said a little too loudly. Marked it all up. This whole section is ours." He held up his hands. They were stained with the red paint, but also with the dark, sticky sap from the tree. This stuff is a nightmare to get off. As darkness fell, the generator refused to start. We pulled the cord again and again, but the engine only gave a few pathetic coughs before falling silent. We were left with only the campfire again. The mood was even heavier than the night before. That's when Rith started complaining about the smell. "Can you smell that?" he asked, wrinkling his nose. "It's stronger than before, it's right here." We could all smell it, the cloying scent of mangoes and sap, but for Rith, it seemed to be personal, concentrated. He kept rubbing at his hands, scrubbing them with dirt and water, but he couldn't get the scent of the sap off. Later, as we tried to rest, I heard him muttering in his sleep, twisting and turning. Then he sat bolt upright, his eyes wide in the firelight. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice shaking. "Hear what down?" Bongkem asked gently from across the fire. Whispering right in my ear, a woman crying. We listened. There was nothing but the sound of the jungle. No whispers from the stumps tonight, just an unnerving, watchful quiet. The next day, Rith was worse. He had dark circles under his eyes and he jumped at every sound. He claimed he kept seeing a woman with long black hair peeking at him from behind the trees at the edge of the clearing. A woman whose skin looked like pale, smooth wood. We saw nothing. He refused to work, spending the entire day in the camp, his eyes darting back and forth into the jungle. He kept smelling his hands, a frantic, obsessive gesture. "I can't get it off," he'd mutter to himself. "The smell, she smells it, that's how she finds me." Bongkem tried to reason with him to calm him down, but Rith was becoming unreachable, lost in his own private terror. Visna simply stayed as far away from him as possible, clutching his prayer beads so tightly his knuckles were white. The true horror began after sunset on the third day. A storm was brewing. The sky was a bruised purple and the air was heavy and still, pregnant with rain. Rith was sitting on a log, rocking back and forth when he suddenly screamed, a raw, throat-tearing scream of pure terror. He pointed a trembling finger toward the line of trees. There, she's coming for me." We all spun around. For a split second I saw it, or I think I saw it, a flicker of movement, something tall and pale just for an instant before it was gone. It was so fast I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me in the dying light. But Bongkem saw it too. His face went white. "Arak," he breathed, the word a prayer and a curse. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, hissing in the embers of our fire. And the whispering started again, not from the stumps this time. It was all around us, carried on the wind that was beginning to rush through the trees. It was no longer sorrowful. It was hungry. It was a chorus of angry, accusatory voices. Rith scrambled backwards away from the tree line, his eyes wild with fear. No, stay away from me. I didn't mean it. I needed the money." The wind howled and the rain came down in a solid, blinding sheet. The fire was extinguished in an instant, plunging us into absolute, terrifying darkness. The only light was the occasional, ghostly flash of lightning that illuminated the clearing in stark, frozen tableaus. In one flash, I saw Rith cowering in the mud. In the next, I saw Bongkem trying to pull him toward the flimsy shelter of the tarpaulin. And in the third flash, I saw her. She was standing right behind Rith. She was tall, impossibly tall, and her form seemed to be made of woven branches and pale, luminous bark. Her hair was a cascade of dark leaves and vines that flowed to the ground. She had no face, no eyes, just a smooth, featureless surface where a face should be. From her long, twig-like fingers, a thick, coppery sap was dripping onto the ground. The air was so thick with the smell of mangoes and sap it was like drowning. Rith let out a choked, gurgling sound. The lightning flashed again and the woman's branch-like arms were wrapped around him. He wasn't struggling. His body was limp, his head lolled back at an unnatural angle. From his open mouth, a small green vine was beginning to sprout. Bongkem screamed, a sound of utter despair, and tried to lunge forward, but I grabbed his arm and pulled him back. There was nothing we could do. We were like ants trying to fight a flood. "We have to go now," I yelled over the roar of the storm. We ran. We stumbled blindly through the mud and the lashing rain, away from the camp, away from what was happening to Rith. The angry whispering was everywhere, swirling around us, nipping at our heels. I felt phantom, twig-like fingers brush the back of my neck. Visna was sobbing, chanting prayers that were snatched away by the wind. We didn't stop running until the sun came up. We ran all night, fueled by a terror I have no words to describe. We didn't have any tools, any food, any water. We just had the clothes on our backs and the all-consuming need to escape. We found the muddy track a day later. 2 days after that, a passing logging truck, its driver's eyes widening at the sight of 3 mud-caked, half-mad apparitions staggering out of the jungle, picked us up. We never talked about what happened. Not really. What was there to say? We told the company there was an accident, a flash flood. Rith was lost. They didn't ask too many questions. They had lost equipment, but we were replaceable. They wrote us off. I never saw a single riel of the money. I made it back to Phnom Penh, a ghost of the boy who had left. My mother's condition had worsened. I sold what little I had, but it was not enough. She passed away a few weeks later in the middle of mango season. I am back to driving a moto taxi. I am surrounded by the noise of the city, the roar of a million engines. I try to lose myself in it. But sometimes when I am stopped in traffic, the smell will drift over from a vendor's fruit cart, the sweet, rich scent of ripe mangoes. And I am back there in the darkness. The air grows thick. The sound of the traffic fades, replaced by the chirping of cicadas and the whisper of angry voices. I can feel the humidity pressing down, and I can smell the coppery tang of sap beneath the sweetness. I can see a tall, pale woman with no face and hair made of leaves. I can see a vine sprouting from a dead man's mouth. They say you can leave the jungle, but the jungle never leaves you. I carry it with me, the guilt, the fear, the memory of its weeping. So if you ever find yourself in a place where the trees are old and the world is quiet, listen. Listen to what the forest is telling you. And if you smell the sweet, cloying scent of ripe mangoes when there is no mango tree in sight, run. Run and do not look back, because you have been noticed, and you have been judged, and the forest has a very, very long memory. The black sap of the cardamoms. The jungle doesn't just get dark, it swallows the light. One moment, the world is painted in the harsh, yellow glare of a portable generator, the air vibrating with its angry chug. The next, a sputter, a cough, a final, rattling sigh, then nothing. Nothing but a darkness so complete, so absolute, it feels like a physical weight pressing down on your eyelids. That's how our end began, with the death of a machine. My name is Savan. Before that night, I was just another man from the outskirts of Phnom Penh, trying to outrun the debts that clung to my family like the city's humid smog. My mother's sickness required medicine that cost more than I made in a year driving a tuk-tuk. So when the offer came, good money, quick money, for a few weeks of specialized timber extraction in the Cardamom Mountains, I didn't ask too many questions. I knew it was illegal. We all did. But desperation is a powerful blindfold. There were 4 of us. Bongthorn, the crew chief, a man whose smile never reached his eyes and whose hands were always counting money that wasn't his yet. Puvath, an old man from a village near the mountain, his skin like wrinkled leather and his face a roadmap of silent warnings we were too stupid to read. And Aundara, a boy really barely 20 who'd left his village for the first time, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and foolish ambition. And me, I was the one who knew how to fix the saws. We had been at the camp for a week. A ragged clearing carved into the ancient forest, a scar of red earth and sawdust. Our days were a blur of sweat, noise, and the satisfying crash of centuries-old hardwood trees. At night, we'd huddle around the generator's light, eating rice with dried fish and prahak, the smell of diesel fumes a comforting shield against the immense, living darkness that pressed in from all sides. The jungle was always talking, a billion insects, the distant call of a gibbon, the rustle of things unseen. But the generator's roar was our language, a declaration that we were here, that we were masters. Until it died. The silence that rushed in was deafening. It was heavier than any sound I had ever heard. Every cricket, every cicada, every nocturnal whisper of the forest floor seemed to magnify, to become a distinct and separate voice in a choir of shadows. Savan, Bongthorn's voice was sharp, cutting through the thick air. What is it? Get the light working. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands slick with the humid air. The beam cut a weak, trembling cone through the darkness. I don't know, Bong, it was full of fuel, maybe the filter is clogged. Useless, he spat, fix it now. Puvath, the old man, said nothing. He simply stared out into the blackness, his posture rigid. Dara, the young one, had shuffled closer to me, his breathing shallow and quick. I could feel the fear coming off him in waves. That's when the smell hit us. It wasn't the usual scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and fresh-cut timber. This was different. It was thick, cloying, and sweet. A scent I knew from the Watts, from the quiet, somber rooms where families mourned. It was the smell of funeral incense. It crept into the clearing from all sides, a phantom fog that had no source, a memory of grief that had no body. Then a second smell weaving through the first, metallic, coppery, the stale, iron-rich scent of old blood. "What is that smell?" Dara whispered, his voice cracking. Bong Thorn grunted, waving a hand in front of his face. "Someone's cooking fire from a village, or you're imagining things, Saven, the generator." I tried to focus. I knelt by the machine, the flashlight held in my teeth. My fingers fumbled with the fuel cap, the greasy metal casing, but my attention was pulled away, pulled by a new sound. It started at the far edge of the clearing, just where our light couldn't properly reach. A rhythmic, wet scraping. Scrrrape, pause, scrrrape, pause. It was a sound both alien and deeply familiar. It was the sound a chainsaw's chain makes when it's not spinning, when it's being dragged slowly, deliberately, across stone. Each scrape of the metal teeth was like a fingernail down the spine of the night. Bong Thorn, Dara's voice was a choked plea. "Did you hear that?" "It's just an animal," Thorn snapped, but his own flashlight beam was now sweeping nervously across the tree line, dancing over the massive, felled logs that lay like sleeping giants around us. I stood up, my own light joining his. I followed the sound, pointing my beam towards the source. It landed on one of the stumps, the wound we had left in the earth that morning, and what I saw made the breath catch in my throat. The stump, it was weeping. From the clean-cut surface, a thick, glistening substance was oozing out, running in slow, dark rivulets down the bark. It wasn't the pale, watery sap of a living tree. This was black, pitch black like tar, but with a sickening, oily sheen that caught the light. It looked like the forest was bleeding ink. I swung my beam to the next stump. It was the same, and the next. All of them, our day's work, were weeping this dark, viscous fluid. The metallic smell was stronger here, rising from the stumps like a foul steam. "Poo Vuth," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What is this? What's happening?" The old man finally turned his head to look at me. In the flickering flashlight beams, his face was a mask of grim resignation. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who had been waiting for this all his life. "The Nik Ta Nong Ph Num," he murmured, his voice low and raspy. "The spirits of the mountain, they are awake. We have taken too much. We have cut their bones." Bong Thorn let out a harsh, contemptuous laugh. "Spirits, old man, you've been in the jungle too long. It's just sap, some kind of reaction to the air." But the scraping sound continued, closer now. Scrrrape, scrrrape. It was moving along the edge of the clearing, circling us. And then another sound joined it. It wasn't a growl or a scream or any animal I knew. It was a whisper. It slithered out from the tree line, carried on the incessant, buzzing drone of 1,000 cicadas. It was a woman's voice, thin and reedy, full of a desperate sorrow. It was a voice I hadn't heard in 2 years, not since I stood over her hospital bed, holding her hand as she faded away. It was my mother's voice. "Kun, my son," the whisper coiled around me, intimate and terrifying. "Run, run, my child, before the forest claims your bones for its roots." My flashlight fell from my trembling hand, plunging my world into darkness. The only light was from Bong Thorn's frantic beam, and in that split second I saw it. I saw his light catch on the eyes of Poo Vuth, and they were filled not with fear, but with a profound, soul-deep pity. Pity for us, for the dead men who just didn't know it yet. The silence that followed my mother's whisper was worse than any sound. Bong Thorn had stopped talking. Even the scraping had paused. It felt like the entire jungle was holding its breath, waiting for our response. "A trick." Bong Thorn's voice was strained, the bravado gone. He was trying to convince himself. "A trick of the wind. Your mind is playing games with you, Saven." But I knew my mother's voice. I knew the specific way she said "Kun," the gentle lilt that could calm any storm in my childhood heart. To hear it now, here in this suffocating darkness, was a violation. It was a key turning in a lock deep inside me, opening a door to a terror I never knew existed. Dara was openly weeping now, quiet, hitched sobs. He had backed himself against the cold, silent generator as if the dead machine could somehow protect him. Poo Vuth spoke, his voice the only steady thing in the clearing. They can do this. They take the voices of those you love. They use your heart to bait the trap." "Shut up, old man," Thorn roared, his fear finally boiling over into anger. There are no ghosts, there are only thieves or rangers trying to scare us off. I'm not leaving this timber." He raised his flashlight, its beam a defiant spear against the darkness. "Show yourselves." The challenge hung in the air, heavy and stupid. The jungle answered. The scraping sound returned, but it was different now. It was faster, and it wasn't alone. From another direction, a second scraping joined it, and a third. It sounded like a dozen invisible workers were sharpening their tools on the edge of our camp, preparing for our harvest. I need to use the latrine," Dara stammered, his voice thin as a thread. He was looking at the small, makeshift toilet we dug at the very edge of the clearing, partially shielded by a tarp. "Stay here, Aun Dara," Puvuth commanded, his voice firm. "Do not leave the circle of the camp." "But I have to." "Use a tree, just stay close," Bongthorn yelled, his attention still fixed on the darkness. Dara hesitated, his small body trembling. He took a few shuffling steps towards a large tree just within the clearing's boundary, his flashlight beam shaking so badly it looked like a trapped firefly. We watched his silhouette, a small island of fear in a sea of night. The scraping stopped, all of it at once. The silence that returned was predatory. We heard a gasp from Dara's direction, a wet, choking sound. "Dara," I called out. No answer. "Aun Dara." His flashlight, which had been pointing at the ground, suddenly jerked upwards, illuminating the underside of the tree's canopy in a chaotic splash of light. Then it fell, hitting the ground with a soft thud. Its beam now pointed back towards us, casting a long, distorted shadow of the tree's trunk. And in that weak, sideways light, we saw the shadow of something else. It was attached to the trunk, a lumpy, unnatural shape, and from it, something long and thin was slowly retracting back into the darkness. Then came the scream. It wasn't a long scream, it was short, sharp, and wetly cut off as if a hand had been clamped over his mouth, a hand made of mud and roots. There was a heavy, dragging sound, the sound of a body being pulled through dirt and leaves, and then silence again, the kind of silence that leaves a ringing in your ears. Dara was gone, his flashlight lay on the ground, a single accusatory eye in the night. Bongthorn was frozen for a moment, his face a pale mask of disbelief. Then rage took over. "What was that? A tiger? A bear?" He grabbed the biggest chainsaw from our tool pile, the one we used for felling the giants. He yanked the cord once, twice. It sputtered but didn't catch. "Don't!" Puvuth's voice was a desperate hiss. "The sound will draw it. The noise of the machines is what angered it." Thorn ignored him, yanking the cord again and again with furious, grunting pulls. The saw refused to start. It was as dead as the generator. He threw it down with a curse that was swallowed by the oppressive quiet. "We have to find him," I said, my voice shaking. "We can't just leave him." Puvuth put a hand on my arm. It felt as dry and gnarled as a root. "He is already gone, Kun Saven. He belongs to the forest now. His blood will feed the trees we wounded." The sheer, awful certainty in his voice chilled me more than the screams. He wasn't speculating, he was stating a fact. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. I took a step towards where Dara's light lay, my own beam cutting a path. "Stay back," Puvuth warned. I ignored him. I had to see, I had to know. I crept forward, my boots sinking into the soft earth. The air was thick with the smell of incense, blood, and now a fresh wave of something else, the smell of raw, terrified sweat, Dara's sweat. I reached his flashlight and picked it up. I pointed the beam where he had been standing. There were deep gouges in the earth as if a farmer's rake had clawed its way through the dirt. Leading from the gouges was a wide, shallow trail where his body had been dragged into the tree line. And on the trunk of the tree where I had seen that strange shadow was a smear of glistening black, the same sap that was weeping from the stumps. It was sticky, and mixed within it were a few threads from Dara's cheap, checkered krama. My stomach heaved. This wasn't an animal. An animal has claws, teeth, it leaves tracks. This was something else. This was the earth itself reaching out to claim a debt. I stumbled back towards the others, my heart hammering against my ribs. He was dragged. Puvuth was right, it wasn't an animal. Bongthorn finally seemed to understand. The anger drained from his face, replaced by a primal, naked fear. His eyes darted around the clearing, no longer looking for a man or a beast, but for a monster he couldn't comprehend. "What is it?" he asked Puvuth, his voice a hoarse whisper. "What wants to kill us?" The old man looked up at the moonless sky, at the canopy of leaves that had become the roof of our tomb. "It is the guardian," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of generations of belief. "When a forest is this old, it develops a heart, a spirit. The Nikta, our ancestors left offerings. They asked permission before taking a single branch for firewood. They knew, they respected the balance." He looked at the dead generator, then at the felled trees lying like corpses around us. "We came with fire and noise. We did not ask. We did not offer. We tore the heart out of the Ancient One. We spilled its life on the ground." He pointed a trembling finger at a weeping stump. "You think that is sap? That is the mountain's blood, and the spirit, the pre, it is the antibody. It is the forest's attempt to heal itself by removing the infection." He looked from me to Bong Thorn. "We are the infection." The weight of his words settled over us. A shroud of inescapable doom. We weren't just lost in the jungle. We were trespassing in the veins of a living, angry god. And my mother's voice, her sweet, loving voice, had been its lure. It had used my most precious memory to paralyze me with a combination of hope and terror, to hold me in place while it took the boy. The scraping sound started again. It was in the camp now, not at the edge. It was coming from right behind the tent where we stored our fuel. SCRRRR rape, SCRRRR rape. Slow, close, confident, it knew we had nowhere to run. Bong Thorn's greed was a powerful thing. It had driven him into this forest, and even in the face of impossible horror, it was the first thing he reached for. His eyes darted towards the small, locked metal box where he kept our pay and the profits from the first truckload of timber. It was his god, and he wasn't about to leave it behind. "We have to make a run for it," he whispered, his voice tight with panic. "The truck is maybe 5 kilometers down the trail. We leave now, we might make it by sunrise." "We will not last 5 minutes on that trail in the dark," Puvuth stated calmly. "It knows the paths, we do not. Our only chance is to stay here together and pray for the sun." "Pray?" Thorn scoffed, a flicker of his old self returning. "Prayer won't stop whatever took that boy. I'm getting my money and I'm leaving. If you have any sense, you'll come with me." He scrambled over to the supply tent, fumbling with the keys to the lockbox. The scraping sound stopped the moment he touched the metal. The entire jungle went silent again. This time, the silence was different. It wasn't waiting, it was watching. From the darkness behind the tent, a new sound emerged, a low, guttural clicking like giant insects chittering. It was accompanied by a wet, tearing noise. Thorn froze, his hand on the lockbox. He slowly turned his head, his flashlight beam cutting a shaking path towards the source of the sound. The beam landed on something that didn't belong. It was one of our chainsaws, the one he had tried to start moments before, but it was changed. Vines, thick and black like snakes, had wrapped around the engine casing and the handle, pulsing with a faint internal light. The metal of the guide bar was coated in the same black sap which dripped from the teeth of the chain onto the ground, sizzling faintly as it touched the earth. The whole thing looked like a grotesque parody of a tool, a piece of nature that had consumed and repurposed a piece of machinery. And it was moving. The vines were contracting and releasing, dragging the chainsaw forward an inch at a time. The scraping sound we'd been hearing, it was the chain being pulled across the ground. The clicking was the sound of the teeth catching on stones and roots. Bong Thorn stared, his mouth hanging open. He couldn't process what he was seeing. The chainsaw thing slid forward another foot. It was heading directly for him. "Bong Thorn, move," I screamed, finding my voice. The scream broke his paralysis. He let go of the lockbox and stumbled backward, falling over a pile of firewood. He crab-walked away from the advancing horror, his face a mess of terror. The thing didn't speed up, it just kept coming. Slow, inevitable, the clicking grew louder, the smell of blood and incense washing over us in a nauseating wave. Then from the darkness all around us, shapes began to resolve. They weren't solid, they were half-formed things of shadow and vine, of damp earth and tangled roots. Some were vaguely humanoid, others like twisted animals, and they all had pieces of our camp embedded in them. One had the blade of a machete for an arm, another had a tangle of our nylon ropes for hair. They were shambling, silent monstrosities born from our intrusion. They were the forest's immune system, and they were closing in. Puvuth began to chant, a low, monotonous Pali prayer. It was a prayer for the dead, a plea for a safe passage into the next life. He wasn't praying for rescue, he was praying for his soul. Bongthorn finally found his feet. He turned and ran, not towards the trail but towards the center of the clearing, towards the largest of the felled trees, the ancient giant we'd brought down just yesterday. It was over 100 feet long, a fallen god. He scrambled onto it, thinking the height would give him an advantage. The chainsaw thing changed direction, following him. It reached the base of the log and began to crawl up, the vines finding purchase on the rough bark, the chain scraping a deep gouge into the wood we had intended to sell. Thorn reached the middle of the massive trunk and turned, his flashlight beam fixed on the approaching horror. He was trapped. "Help me," he shrieked, his voice thin and pathetic. "Saven, do something." But what could I do? Throw a rock at a nightmare? The whisper returned, my mother's voice, but this time it wasn't a warning, it was a lament. "The greedy mouth eats the dirt of its own grave, my son." The chainsaw thing reached Thorn. He screamed and kicked at it, but the vines were like steel. They wrapped around his leg, pulling him down. The chain, still not spinning but dragged by the powerful contractions of the vines, was pulled across his shin. His scream turned into a wet, gurgling shriek of agony as the metal teeth tore through his trousers and flesh, right down to the bone. The other figures, made of root and shadow, converged on the log, swarming over him like ants. We couldn't see exactly what they were doing, but we could hear it. The sounds of tearing, of wet crunching, of a man being disassembled. His screams faded, replaced by the ghastly symphony of his own destruction. And through it all, Puvuth kept chanting his prayer for the dead. I was paralyzed, watching the unthinkable happen, but the old man grabbed my shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. "Now," he said, his voice urgent. "It is distracted, it is feeding on his greed. This is our only chance. We run, not for the truck, for the river. Water is life, it may not be able to cross." He shoved me towards the opposite side of the clearing, away from the gruesome scene on the log. My legs felt like lead, but some primal instinct took over. I ran. We plunged into the blackness of the tree line, the sounds of Bongthorn's demise fading behind us. We crashed through undergrowth, thorns and branches tearing at our clothes and skin. I couldn't see anything, I was just following the sound of Puvuth's labored breathing in front of me. The jungle was no longer neutral. It felt actively malevolent. Roots seemed to curl up to trip my feet. Low-hanging vines whipped at my face like angry tendrils. The air grew colder, the smells of the clearing replaced by the scent of deep, wet rot. And the scraping sound began again. Behind us, many of them, they were following us. We could hear them moving through the trees, much faster than us. They didn't need to see, they were the forest. They knew every path, every tree, every rock. We were just two blind, terrified men stumbling through their home. "This way," Puvuth grunted, pulling me to the left. "I can hear the water." And he was right. Beneath the sound of our own panicked flight and the scraping of our pursuers, I could hear it. The faint, promising murmur of a current. We ran harder, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. The scraping was getting closer, so close I could hear the wet clicking of the things that were chasing us. My mother's voice came again, desperate now. "Hurry, Coon, hurry!" It was no longer a lure. It felt like her spirit was truly there, a terrified spectator to her son's final moments. We broke through a final wall of ferns, and there it was. A river, not wide but deep and fast, its water black under the starless sky. Hope, a feeling I thought had been extinguished forever, surged in my chest. Puvuth didn't hesitate. He half ran, half fell down the muddy bank and plunged into the cold water. I was right behind him. The shock of the cold was like a slap in the face, clearing my head for a split second. We started swimming, letting the current pull us downstream, away from the sounds. I risked a look back. At the edge of the riverbank they stood, a dozen of them, shapes of vine and shadow and stolen metal. They did not enter the water, they just stood there watching us, their forms barely visible against the dark jungle. The chainsaw thing was among them, its chain hanging limp, dripping black sap onto the mud. For a moment I thought we had made it, I thought we were safe. But Puvuth suddenly cried out. He was just a few feet ahead of me. He thrashed in the water, his face contorted in pain. "Puvuth," I yelled, trying to swim towards him. "Something has me," he gasped, his eyes wide with terror. From below, a root. He was pulled under. He surfaced a moment later, sputtering, his hands clawing at his leg. "It's in the river too, go Saven, go." He was pulled under again. This time he didn't come back up. The water where he had been churned for a moment, and a swirl of dark, inky blackness rose to the surface. The sap, the blood of the mountain, it had claimed him too. I was alone. I don't know how long I was in that river. I just let the current take me, my mind a blank slate of horror. I remember the sky slowly turning from pitch black to a bruised purple, then to a sickly gray. I remember my body hitting a sandbar and crawling out of the water, too exhausted to even shiver. I lay there until the sun was fully up. Sometime in the mid-morning, I heard the sound of an engine. An old logging truck, one not associated with our illegal crew, was making its way down a nearby dirt road. I stumbled out of the trees, a wild man covered in mud, scratches, and terror. The driver who found me thought I was a ghost. I tried to tell them what happened. I told the police in the nearest provincial town. I told them about Bong Thorn, Pu Vuth, and Young Dura. I told them about the generator, the smells, the scraping, and the weeping trees. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. They sent a team of rangers to the coordinates I gave them. They found the camp, the abandoned tools, the dead generator, the felled trees. They noted the strange, black, sap-like substance on the stumps, but the official report called it an unidentified fungal blight. They found no bodies, no blood, no sign of a struggle. Dara, Thorn, and Pu Vuth had simply vanished. I was the sole survivor of a logging accident that never happened, a ghost story without any ghosts. They held me for a week, then let me go, warning me never to return to the cardamoms. I went back to Phnom Penh, back to my life. I paid for my mother's medicine with the advance Bong Thorn had given me. She got better, but I did not. The jungle followed me home. Some nights when the city is quiet, I hear it, a faint, wet scraping sound from the alley below my apartment. Sometimes I catch a whiff of funeral incense on the breeze, even when there are no funerals nearby. I can't look at a tree without seeing the stumps weeping their black blood. I can't hear a chainsaw without remembering the monster that wore its chain. But the worst part, the part that keeps me awake night after night, is something else. Sometimes when I am washing my hands, I will see it, a tiny, dark fleck under my fingernails. No matter how hard I scrub, it's always there. It looks like a speck of dirt, but I know what it is. It's a tiny, glistening fleck of black sap. The forest marked me. It let me go, but it marked me. I am a loose thread from its great, dark tapestry, and I have this constant, gnawing feeling that one day it will pull on that thread and unravel me completely. So if you ever find yourself in the deep, ancient places of the world, be careful what you take. Be careful what noise you make. Show respect. Leave an offering, because some debts are not paid with money, they are paid with bone and blood. In the forest always collects. The harvest of Cabal Damre. The sweat doesn't evaporate here. It clings to you, a second skin of salt and humid air heavy as a shroud. In Phnom Penh, the heat is a familiar enemy, one you can fight with a cheap fan or a cold glass of sugarcane juice. But out here in the deep green heart of the Cardamom Mountains, the heat is a living thing. It breathes on you, presses down from the canopy above, and seeps up from the soil below. It's an oppressive, endless weight. For 2 months, that weight was the price of a future. Every swing of the axe, every roar of the chainsaw, was a deposit into an account that would pay for a small apartment for my wife, Likina, and the baby we had on the way. I wasn't a logger. I was a moto taxi driver who saw an advertisement promising triple my yearly earnings for 6 months of hard labor. I left the familiar chaos of the city for this suffocating, primordial green. Our camp was a ragged wound in the jungle, a clearing of red earth and sawdust populated by 3 wooden shacks and a temperamental generator. We were a small crew. Bong Kale, our foreman, was a man whose skin was the color and texture of old leather, his face a roadmap of hard years. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words carried the same weight as the ancient trees we felled. Then there was Rith, young and wiry, with a cocky grin, and an impatience for anything that wasn't money or rice wine. And Sathya, quiet and devout, who would burn incense at a small, makeshift shrine every morning, his lips moving in silent prayer to the spirits of the land we were carving up. I fell somewhere in the middle. I respected the old ways, the stories my grandmother told me of Nik Ta, the guardian spirits of the land, but the city had sanded down the edges of my belief. My spirit was the hum of a coming paycheck. That evening, the work was done. The sun had bled out behind the mountains, but the heat remained thick and choking. The generator, our only tether to the modern world, sputtered and coughed, casting our small clearing in a nervous, flickering light. The shadows of the freshly sawn stumps stretched and danced like skeletal fingers. We sat on logs, eating rice and salted fish, the familiar drone of a million cicadas a constant, deafening wall of sound. It was the music of the jungle, the pulse of this place. And then it stopped. Not gradually, not one by one. It was as if a switch had been thrown. One moment, the air was vibrating with the chorus of insects. The next, a profound, unnatural silence fell over the clearing. The only sound was the weak chug of the generator and the clink of my spoon against my bowl, which now sounded as loud as a hammer blow. I looked up. Rith had frozen, a ball of rice halfway to his mouth. Sathia's eyes were wide, fixed on the impenetrable wall of darkness that ringed our camp. Even Bong Kale, who seemed as unflappable as the mountain itself, slowly lowered his bowl. The silence was heavier than the heat. It felt wrong, like holding your breath for too long. My heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "What was that?" I whispered, the words feeling clumsy and loud in the dead air. Rith scoffed, trying to reclaim the moment with his bravado. "Maybe they got tired, bugs need to sleep too, Aun Vanna." But his voice lacked its usual confidence. His eyes darted into the darkness just like ours. Sathya shook his head slowly, his knuckles white where he gripped a small amulet around his neck. "They do not sleep all at once," he murmured. "Something has frightened them, something big." And as he said it, a new sound began to rise. It wasn't loud. It was a low, guttural vibration, a chant. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a deep, resonant hum that you felt in the soles of your boots, in the base of your skull. It was the sound of 100 monks in a distant pagoda, but stripped of all holiness, leaving only something ancient and raw. It seemed to emanate from the very soil beneath us. Then came the smell. It rolled into the clearing like a fog, thick and cloying. It was the scent of jackfruit, so overripe it had begun to turn, a sickly sweetness that coated the back of my throat. Woven through it was another, fainter smell. The phantom aroma of incense, the kind my grandmother would burn for the ancestors, but this smelled old, stale, like incense left to smolder in a forgotten tomb. My stomach churned. The salted fish I'd just eaten threatened to come back up. "Bong Kale," I said, my voice trembling. "What is that sound, that smell?" He didn't answer. He was staring at the tree line, his weathered face pale in the sputtering lamplight. His gaze was fixed on the largest of the stumps, a behemoth we had taken down just that morning. It was a chh-oak tree, ancient and gnarled, its trunk so wide it had taken all 4 of us the better part of the day to fell. A whisper of 1,000 dry leaves skittered across the clearing. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, a cold that had no business being in this oppressive heat. I looked up at the canopy, expecting to see branches swaying in a sudden breeze. But nothing moved, not a single leaf stirred. The air was dead, still and heavy. Yet the sound persisted, a dry, rasping rustle like skeletal fingers scratching at the earth. And through that impossible sound, another one began to echo. It started faint, a high-pitched whine from deep within the blackness of the jungle. It was a familiar sound, one we had made all day, but this was different. It was thin, ethereal, a ghost of a noise. The whine grew louder, closer, resolving itself into the unmistakable shriek of a chainsaw. Our chainsaws were silent, cleaned and stored in the tool shed. This was a phantom echo of our day's work, a mocking shriek that seemed to be celebrating. It screamed with a kind of glee, a hungry, metallic cry that promised a harvest of a different kind. The generator gave one last, pathetic cough and died. We were plunged into absolute darkness, with nothing but the mocking scream of an invisible chainsaw and a chant that rose from the ground to swallow us whole. The darkness that fell was total. It was a physical presence, a thick black ink that suffocated the world. The moon and stars were blotted out by the dense canopy, and for a few terrifying seconds I was blind, lost in a void of sound and smell. The guttural chant seemed to get louder, the vibration in the ground more intense. The phantom chainsaw wailed, its pitch rising and falling as if it were biting into unseen wood, just beyond the edge of our clearing. A frantic scrabbling sound broke the spell. It was Rith fumbling for his torch. A weak yellow beam cut through the black, shaking violently. It swept across our faces, capturing wide, terrified eyes. Sathya was chanting his own prayers now, a desperate, rapid-fire whisper of Pali scripture. Bong Kale was on his feet, his hand gripping the handle of a long-bladed machete that he always kept near. Inside now, Bong Kale's voice was a harsh growl cutting through the unholy noise. We didn't need to be told twice. We scrambled for the main shack, a flimsy structure of raw planks and a corrugated tin roof. It felt like fleeing a tiger by hiding in a paper box. We slammed the wooden door shut and barred it as if that could stop a sound or a smell. Inside, the heat was even more intense. The air was thick with the smell of our fear, a sour metallic tang that mingled with the sickly sweet jackfruit and phantom incense from outside. Rith managed to light a kerosene lamp, and its warm, gentle light pushed the absolute blackness back to the shack's thin walls, but it did little to comfort us. The shadows it cast were long and deep, turning familiar shapes into monstrous forms. The sound of the phantom chainsaw was closer now. It circled the clearing, a predator stalking its prey. Its scream was maddening, a constant reminder of our own destructive work turned back on us. "What is this, Bong?" Rith's voice was high-pitched, his bravado completely gone. "What is happening?" Bong Kale stood by the single, shuttered window, listening. "We angered something," he said, his voice low and grave, "when we took down the big chhloke tree." Sathya stopped his prayers and looked at the foreman, his face ashen in the lamplight. "The spirit tree," he whispered. "I felt it when we arrived, a presence. I made offerings every morning, Bong Kale. Every morning I prayed for forgiveness for the work we must do." "Your offerings were not enough," Bong Kale said, a note of finality in his tone. He turned from the window to look at us, his eyes dark with a fear that seemed ancient. "There are some places, some trees that belong to the Nikta. They are not for men to touch. They are older than any memory. To cut them down is to break a bone of the earth itself. The spirit has no home now, so it will make a new one here with us." The chant outside suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. The chainsaw fell silent too. All we could hear was the frantic pounding of our own hearts and the sound of our ragged breathing in the stifling hut. I found myself holding my breath, straining my ears, waiting for what I didn't know. A soft scratching sound started at the door. It wasn't an animal, it was slow, deliberate, scrape, scrape, pause, scrape, like a long fingernail being dragged down the wood. Rith let out a choked gasp and backed away from the door, his torch beam trembling so hard it looked like a strobe light. "Do not open it," Sathya warned, his voice barely a whisper. "Whatever you do, do not open that door." The scratching stopped. We waited in silence for what felt like an eternity. Then a voice whispered from the other side of the door. It was a woman's voice, soft, melodic, and impossibly close. It sounded like it was speaking directly into my ear. "Aun, let me in, I am cold." My blood ran like ice water. It was a trick. It had to be a trick. But the voice, it was gentle, pleading. It sounded like Likina, my wife. For a split second, a wild, insane hope surged through me, but she was in Phnom Penh, hundreds of kilometers away. I looked at the others. Bong Kale's face was a mask of grim resolve. Rith was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face. That's my mother's voice," he sobbed quietly. Sathya's eyes were squeezed shut. "It knows our hearts," he hissed. "It pulls on our attachments. It is a lie, do not listen." The voice came again, this time with a hint of sorrow. "Son, you work so hard, you are tired, just open the door and rest." The sound of dry leaves rustled right outside the door, and then another sound, a soft, wet, tearing noise. The sweet, cloying smell of jackfruit intensified tenfold, flooding the small shack. It was so strong it made my eyes water. It smelled like decay, like death. The scratching started again, but this time it was on the walls, all around us, on the tin roof above our heads. 100 sharp points scraping and clawing at our flimsy shelter, searching for a way in. The phantom chainsaw roared back to life, not in the clearing, but right outside the wall, so loud the planks vibrated against my back. We were trapped, and the thing outside was getting impatient. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Time had dissolved into a thick soup of terror. The scratching on the walls was relentless, a maddening symphony of malice. The chainsaw would roar to life, scream for a while, then fall silent, only to be replaced by the pleading whispers of our loved ones just outside the door. It was a form of torture designed to break our minds. Rith was a wreck, curled in a corner, muttering to himself. Sathya had resumed his prayers, his voice a steady, hypnotic drone that was the only anchor in our sea of fear. Bong Kale and I stood watch, machetes in hand, our eyes darting at every sound, every creak of the wood. At some point, I noticed a pattern. The sounds, the whispers, they weren't random. They were focused. The scratching was loudest on the wall nearest to Rith. The chainsaw seemed to rev its engine with a hungry eagerness whenever he cried out. The whispers, while they mimicked all our loved ones, seemed to return to his mother's voice most often. "It wants him," I whispered to Bong Kale, nodding towards Rith. The old foreman nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the shuttered window. He was the first to put his saw to the chhlok tree. He laughed when Sathya warned him to say a prayer first. He said spirits don't pay wages. Karma, the word echoed in my mind from my grandmother's teachings. Every action has a consequence. Rith's disrespect had marked him. The spirit wasn't just angry at all of us, it was hungry for him. Suddenly, a heavy thud slammed against the roof, making the whole shack groan. Dust and splinters rained down on us. Something heavy was up there, walking on the thin tin. Thump, thump, thump. Slow, deliberate footsteps, too heavy for a man. With each step, the tin roof buckled and creaked in protest. The cloying smell of jackfruit and rot became so overpowering I had to cover my nose and mouth with my shirt. The footsteps stopped directly above us. Silence. A thin, dark liquid began to drip through a crack in the ceiling planks. It fell onto the wooden floor with a soft patter. Drop, drop, drop. It wasn't rainwater, it was thick, almost black, and it carried the sickly sweet smell of the phantom jackfruit. Rith looked up at the dripping substance and a new kind of terror seized him. He let out a strangled scream and scrambled to his feet. "No, get it off me!" he shrieked, even though nothing had touched him. He clawed at his own skin, his eyes wide with a madness I had never seen before. "Rith, calm down," Bong Kale shouted, moving towards him. But it was too late. Rith's mind had snapped. With a wild cry, he lunged for the door, fumbling with the bar. "No," Sathya and I screamed in unison. We were too far away. Bong Kale grabbed for his arm, but Rith was fueled by sheer panic. He threw the bar aside and wrenched the door open, stumbling out into the oppressive darkness. For a moment, nothing happened. Rith stood there, panting, silhouetted against the black jungle. The clearing was silent. The scratching had stopped. The footsteps on the roof were gone. "See," Rith said, a hysterical laugh bubbling in his throat. "There's nothing here, it was all in our heads." He took a hesitant step forward, and the phantom chainsaw roared to life. It wasn't a distant echo this time. The sound was right there in the clearing with him, deafeningly loud. It was a visceral, guttural snarl of a two-stroke engine hungry for flesh and bone. Rith froze. The look of manic relief on his face was replaced by one of pure animal terror. He slowly turned his head, looking back towards the shack, his mouth open in a silent scream. We couldn't see what he saw, we only saw him, but the sound was enough. It was moving, circling him at an impossible speed, the whine of the engine getting higher and higher pitched. A sudden gust of wind, smelling of damp earth and decay, slammed the shack door shut, plunging us back into the dim, lamplit interior. We heard Rith scream, a thin, piercing shriek that was abruptly cut short. It was replaced by a wet, chopping sound, the sound of a chainsaw biting into something soft. It went on for a long, long time. We huddled in the shack, listening to the sounds of Rith's destruction, unable to move, unable to breathe. Sathya was weeping openly, his prayers forgot. Bong Kale stood like a statue of granite, his face unreadable, his knuckles white on the hilt of his machete. I was numb, my mind refusing to process the horror that was happening just a few meters away. The promise of a new apartment, of a future for my family, seemed like a foolish dream from another lifetime. When the chainsaw finally sputtered and died, the silence it left behind was a tomb. We knew we couldn't stay. The sun was still hours away, but to remain in that shack was to wait for our own turn. The spirit had taken its first harvest. It would be back for the rest. "We have to run," I croaked, my throat raw. "Now." Bong Kale nodded, his eyes meeting mine. There was no argument, there was only the primal instinct to survive. "Sathya, get the water flasks." Vanna grabbed the compass from my bag. "We go now, we don't look back." Sathya, shaking, did as he was told. I fumbled through the foreman's bag, my fingers clumsy with fear. The compass felt heavy, a small, cold piece of hope in my hand. Bong Kale unbarred the door, but he didn't open it wide. He cracked it just enough to peer outside. "It's quiet," he whispered. "The clearing is empty." He was wrong. The clearing wasn't empty. The smell was still there, a suffocating blanket of rot and phantom incense, and the silence was not peaceful, it was watchful. I could feel it. 1,000 unseen eyes in the darkness, waiting. We head east, Bong Kale commanded. Towards the river. If we can make it to the river by sunrise, we might have a chance. Stay close, do not make a sound, and whatever you see, whatever you hear, do not stop. He pushed the door open, and we stepped out into the night. The air was cool now, but it was a dead, clammy cold. The oppressive heat had been replaced by a chilling dread. The remains of our fire were just gray ashes. The clearing looked as it always had, except for one thing. Where Rith had been standing, there was nothing. No blood, no body, no sign of a struggle. It was as if he had simply been erased from existence. But the ground in that spot was churned up, and a few small, white splinters that looked disturbingly like bone glinted in the faint starlight that now filtered through the canopy. We didn't linger. We plunged into the jungle, a single-file line of terror. Bong Kale led the way, his machete held ready. I was in the middle, my hand clutching the compass so tightly my knuckles ached. Sathya brought up the rear, his quiet sobs the only sound besides the crunch of our boots on the forest floor. The jungle at night is a different world. The darkness is absolute, broken only by the thin beams of our torches. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. The familiar shapes of trees became twisted, monstrous figures. Vines looked like hanging serpents. The air itself felt thick with malice. For the first hour, we moved in silence, our terror a silent bond between us. The sounds of the jungle slowly returned, but they were muted, hesitant. The cicadas did not sing. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Then we heard it again. Faint, distant, the high-pitched whine of the chainsaw. It was behind us. Faster, Bong Kale hissed, not looking back. We broke into a stumbling run, branches whipping at our faces, thorns tearing at our clothes. Panic was a rising tide, threatening to drown what little reason we had left. The whine of the chainsaw grew steadily louder, closer. It was packing us, toying with us. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The beam of Sathya's torch was bobbing frantically behind me, and behind him, in the deep blackness of the jungle, I thought I saw a flicker of movement, something tall and unnaturally thin flitting between the trees. The guttural chant started again, seeming to come from the trees around us. The air grew thick with the smell of decay. Suddenly, Sathya screamed, a short, terrified cry that was cut off with a sickening crunch. I spun around. His torch lay on the ground, its beam pointing up into the canopy, illuminating a chaotic dance of leaves. Sathya was gone. "Don't look back," Bong Kale yelled, grabbing my arm and pulling me forward. "Vanna, run now." We ran with the fire of pure terror in our lungs, not caring about the vines that tripped us or the branches that struck us. The chainsaw was right behind us now, its roar a physical blow against my eardrums. I could hear the rustle of 1,000 dry leaves at my heels, a sound with no source, a sound of pure malevolence. I could feel its presence, a cold, hateful intelligence. It wasn't just a blind force of nature, it was hunting us, it was enjoying this. We burst through a curtain of vines and found ourselves on a steep, muddy slope. Bong Kale slipped, his feet going out from under him. He tumbled down the embankment, his machete flying from his grasp. I scrambled down after him, my torch beam finding him at the bottom, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. A bone-jarring crack echoed through the forest as he tried to stand. He cried out in pain and fell back. "My leg," he gasped, his face slick with sweat and grime. "It's broken." The chainsaw's roar was deafening. It was at the top of the slope just beyond the vines. The chanting was all around us. The smell was suffocating. Bong Kale looked up at me, his old, tired eyes filled with a terrifying clarity. "Go, Vanna," he said, his voice firm despite the pain. "You have a family, a child, go." "No, Bong, I can't leave you," I cried, trying to haul him up. He pushed me away with surprising strength. "There is no time, it wants a payment for the tree. Maybe this will be enough. Now go, live." He grabbed a heavy rock from the ground, his face set in a grim mask of defiance. He was going to face it. He was going to buy me time. Tears streamed down my face, mingling with the sweat and dirt. I wanted to stay. I wanted to fight. But the image of Likina's face, of the child I had never met, flashed in my mind. Survival, raw and selfish, took over. "I'm sorry, Bong," I whispered. Then I turned and ran. I didn't look back when I heard Bong Kale's final, defiant roar. I didn't look back when it was answered by the shriek of the chainsaw, closer and more furious than ever before. I just ran, my lungs burning, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. I ran until the sounds of the hunt faded behind me, replaced by the sound of my own ragged sobs. I don't know how long I ran. I stumbled through the darkness for what felt like days, fueled by nothing but fear. I lost my torch, my water, the compass. I was lost, alone, and hunted. The jungle was my prison. Just as the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the canopy, I collapsed. My body gave out. I lay there on the damp earth, waiting for the end. I closed my eyes and waited for the sound of the chainsaw to claim me. But it never came. Instead, I heard a different sound, the gentle lapping of water. I forced myself up and crawled the last few meters. A river. It was the river Bong Kale had spoken of. I had made it. I plunged my face into the cool water, drinking until my stomach ached. I was alive. It took me 2 more days to follow the river downstream until I found a small fishing village. The people there looked at me as if they had seen a ghost. A wild man, clothes in tatters, face and arms covered in scratches, eyes wide with a terror they could not comprehend. They gave me food and water and arranged for a boat to take me to the nearest town with a road. From there, I got a bus. The entire journey back to Phnom Penh was a blur. The noise, the crowds, the concrete, it all felt alien, unreal. I am home now. I am with Likina. I hold her at night and feel the gentle kick of our baby in her womb. I should feel safe. I should feel relief. But I don't. I survived the jungle, but I did not escape it. Sometimes, in the dead of night when the city is quiet, I can hear it. A faint, high-pitched whine lost in the hum of a distant air conditioner, the sound of a chainsaw. Last week, Likina brought home a jackfruit from the market. As she cut it open, the sweet, cloying smell filled our small apartment. I was seized by a panic so absolute I retched in the corner, unable to breathe. I threw the fruit out. I don't think she will ever understand the look of pure horror on my face. I am a ghost in my own life. I am haunted by the silence where the cicadas should be, by the memory of a chant that rose from the earth. I am haunted by the faces of Sathya, Rith, and Bong Kale, the men who paid the price for my future. I got the money, more than they promised, a hardship bonus the company called it, along with a document to sign saying it was a tragic accident. I look at the stack of bills and I don't see an apartment or a better life. I see the splinters of bone in the dirt. I hear a defiant scream cut short. Some places are not meant for men. Some trees are more than just wood, and they have guardians who do not forgive. We went into the jungle seeking to harvest its riches, but we were the ones who were harvested. So if you ever find yourself in the deep, quiet places of the world and the forest falls silent around you, run. Do not ask why. Do not wait for the smell of rot and incense. Do not wait for the mocking echo of your own work. Just run. Because some debts are not paid with money, they are paid with silence, with fear. And the jungle always collects.